All right, good afternoon, everyone.
Well, welcome everyone. My name is Rick Kitson. I'm the Director of Communication for the Cupertino Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us for our Legislative Action Committee meeting, the first one of 2021. We have a full agenda today, so we're going to skip introductions just so we can talk about what it is we need to talk about and share the issues of the day in Cupertino. And the person we're going to hear from first is our Mayor, Darcy Paul. Mayor Paul is serving his second term as mayor and has been very clear about his priorities of ensuring equity and fairness in municipal services and facilities, as well as ensuring the integrity of the constituent representational process. And with no further ado, Mayor Paul, please, if you could share your thoughts. And ahead of time, Mayor Paul said, if you have questions, please ask them and we'll engage in a discussion here to open up our year in Cupertino.
So thank you very much for coming today. This is a great group. I mean, this is very representative across our community. You've got residents, you've got stakeholders, you've got council members. One thing I do want to mention that we have received city attorney advice in the past that the majority of us can indeed attend meetings outside of the context of a council meeting. However, we are strongly advised not to express opinions with regard to issues that may, or any issues really, but especially issues that may come up on our upcoming and future agendas. So I'll just reiterate that in case anyone has concerns. And I'll also try to stray away from putting firm stakes in the ground on particular positions for these issues. At the same time, I know that we do have a lot of various topics around town and in the region that we've been engaged in a very, very full-throated discussion over the course of the past several years and beyond in terms of how we go forward as a community. This has been a terribly different year, and I use the word terribly advisedly, and I know that everyone will acknowledge the reality of that. But at the same time, I think that when you look at Cupertino's performance, when you look at how we've approached these various issues and challenges, it's also very clear that there is a reason why, when you look at specific and tangible metrics, our community does a very good job. And I think thematically, one of the things that I really want to bring forward in this year's mayor is the idea of gratitude and opportunity, with the notion being that, look, we do have a lot of vociferous and sometimes contentious disagreements. But I think that belies the fact that we are very effective as a community. And if we can, kind of take that opportunity to kind of express that underlying gratitude for what we do well, for what others, are doing well, we can also, amplify the opportunities in front of us. So I just want to, start off the new year in the context of, any kind of, positioning vis-a-vis the business community and chamber by saying that, we're all very grateful for everything that everyone brings to the table. I think that when we're hashing out our differences, it's a matter of trying to figure out, where are the opportunities? And it's also a matter of trying to figure out, what's fair, what makes sense. Systemically, we're trying to foster an open discussion so that we can hash out these issues. So let's, approach it in good faith. And I think that we'll find ourselves in a very good place. I really don't have any possibility of covering every topic. In the past, I would have wanted to try to make some remarks with regard to the represented interests of the people attending. However, in this context, there really is an opportunity here because, you know, honestly, when I look at these two frames on my screen, I see probably a year's worth of agenda items represented by people in development. You've got, you know, John from the water company, you've got John Zarelli from ecology, you got Jeff Christina, my friend from Campbell, who's rolled off in a similar, you know, kind of industry previously. You got housing advocacy, you got environmental advocacy, you know, various developmental interests, as I mentioned previously, community members. You've got, you know, people that serve the nonprofit industry. And so, you know, I think what I would really much rather do is just talk very briefly about a couple of things that I would like to usher through in the coming year, and then just try to open it up for a discussion. If people have a desire to bring forth a particular question or a topic, I'm happy to, you know, try to steward in a meaningful bit of a conversation in this context. But the two projects that I want to talk about are the library expansion as well as the Lawrence MIDI space. And, you know, I think it's pretty well known that those are projects that I would very much like to, in my time on council, ensure get done. The library expansion is going to be kicking off in terms of what you can see tangibly next month. And so I really applaud the efforts made by staff as well as the community. We have a library commission, of course, that's very active. We have a working group from a cross-section of across the community to try to implement a 5,000 square foot space, which is physically essentially in the back of the library near the Grove. That's 2 floors. And, you know, over time, it's been, you know, one of those very, very vigorous discussions, all right? We've had discussions about how this fits into the Civic Center space. Historically, there have been joint discussions about City Hall and potential, you know, for new space there. But eventually, in the last couple of years, we managed to kind of spin off the library space and help to ensure that this space does get built as, you know, not something that's attached to any other project. And I think it's really important in the sense that when you look at Cupertino, you know, people are extremely thoughtful. They will go and utilize a space like the library to a degree that, if you look at the numbers, are unparalleled, not just in our region, but I think quite competitive on a national level. And so as we're progressing, hopefully out of COVID over the course of the year, we're going to see this space get more and more built out. And I would really appreciate any ability from our community to, you know, converge and, you know, support the idea of people coming into, once we emerge from our worldwide pandemic issues, a new space where we can congregate and try to, you know, get a lot of our various issues resolved. I know that community hall is, you know, technically the space for that from the political perspective, but I think this will be a very nice addendum to both the library and our civic center space. And then the other one is Lawrence MIDI. I'm very pleased to report, I'm not really sure if this was very widely known, but over the course of the last couple of decades, we have had conversations with the county and previously with San Jose Water District with regard to the space that is north of where MIDI would come into Cupertino if it crossed Lawrence. So on the far eastern side of Cupertino, where it used to be county space before we annexed it. And the county basically had a policy of not really putting in neighborhood parks. So if you look on the far eastern side of Cupertino, there really are no neighborhood parks. And this represents a very significant amount of space. It is technically also south of where MIDI would go in addition to north, but it's essentially a triangular parcel in the main that is a couple of acres, almost 3 in fact, and there are another 4 acres that go down on the trail. And so we've purchased all that space, and as of this moment, we are going to be working to try to come up with a plan for outreach to the community. And I think that it is a very good way to kind of round out the amenity space for the entirety of the community. My very firm belief is that once you bring in more stakeholders and you address more interests, that is going to help the totality go forward on projects that aren't going to be perfect for everyone, but are going to be answering the needs of the community as a whole. And so I hope that we do get some significant headway into this. I make no pretenses about, in my remaining couple of years on council, being able to open up the space. But I'm really glad to be able to report out that we have acquired it and are moving forward with envisioning trying to balance out this type of amenity throughout the city. So with that, I'd be very happy to entertain topics. And again, I think I could basically take any given person and start a conversation that will last, a good hour or two with regard to, the purview of their professional activities. But, let's see what the will of the group is. I noticed that a few people have also come in. So Anjali, if you don't mind, can we have them introduce themselves as well before we kind of bring it up to more open discussion?
Sure. If you joined in after we did the introductions, can you please unmute yourself? And I think that what I can see is Genzo Saki. Okay.
You want me to jump in?
Mark?
Yes. Mark Burns, Cupertino resident, past president of Cupertino Chamber of Commerce, and realtor at Cole Banker.
Hi, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Let's see. Kay Stockwell? If you would.
Hello, Kai Stockwell here with Sand Hill Public Affairs.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's open this up. Are there particular topics that people would like to discuss? And I haven't kind of made a direct introduction of our city manager Deb Fung, but I'm sure Deb will have the opportunity to share some thoughts. So I guess how's this going to work? Do we have hands raised or anything? Did you want to try raised hands to see if anyone wants to ask a question?
Hey, Anjali, I have a question for the mayor, if you don't mind. Mayor Paul, thank you for being here, and maybe this is for Deb as well. I was just curious as to how the city is dealing with the pandemic now that we're 9 months into it. I know that for a period of time, the city had to make some fairly tough decisions with regards to budgets and staff and whatnot. And I'm just wondering how you're looking at it now and what kind of the short future portends for us. Hopefully we'll see some semblance of normalcy in 2021.
Absolutely. Really appreciate the question, John. So the pandemic, in any given 2-week stretch of time, we have something on the order of a 15 to 20 minute update from our city manager. But I will say that before I open it to Deb to give us a synopsis of her activities over the course of this very tumultuous last 9 months, I will say that I think that when you look at COVID rates throughout the county, there must be some definitive reasons why Cupertino has consistently, over the course of the entirety of this, had at the very least a 2 to 3-fold decrease in the next highest rate of COVID cases in the entirety of the county's jurisdictions. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're very stepwise and careful about how we think through issues and how we conduct ourselves in the context of what we have in front of us. And so, very early on, we were, if not the first, we're essentially tied with Milpitas formally in terms of mandating masks. But the community really came together, and from the political sphere, once we had indicated from council that we were very much dedicated to making sure that our healthcare workers, our community members that are outward facing, have personal protective equipment, and namely masks. There were a lot of contributions that came in from various communities, from various community members and groups. And so we had thousands of masks coming into City Hall, while I think you can fairly say society at large was kind of hashing out that issue. And so, when you look at it as it has sort of, transpired over time, it really doesn't have a very quantitative manifestation. But as for, any number of other issues, I mean, we had a rise of a very visible homeless encampment, multiple ones, in fact, in Cupertino, going in parallel with this pandemic. I'll go ahead and open it up to Deb. Deb, good luck, summarizing everything that's been done over the course of the last 9 months in this context.
Yeah, I'll start with our budget. We did take quite a hefty revenue hit, about $11.5 million in fiscal year 1920, and about the same estimated for the current fiscal year we are in. I will tell you that revenues in the last couple of quarters have been surprisingly high. So while we estimate conservatively, we're doing pretty well. And I want to say that since the original, I'll call it the big recession in 2008, our staff has been doing a lot of financial modeling that includes planning for recession. And so I would say that we're in a pretty solid financial position, although not robust as it used to be. We have done, because of that, I of course had to furlough folks as many other, if not all cities had to. I was fortunate enough to be able to just do part-time temporary support. So those are largely your seasonal workers. Fortunately, we have not had to experience layoffs. Everybody is super busy, which is very difficult for us to manage all the work. And we have done a number of things. Council has, because of our financial position, Council has been able to deploy a rental assistance program. We have deployed assistance for Pathway to Housing for our residents that are experiencing homelessness along Wolf Road. We got 11 on a Pathway to Housing. Some did not accept the opportunity. We have provided dollars for rental assistance across the board. We continue to help small businesses through grants. We're now assisting, Angela is now assisting if they needed help for businesses of the qualifying sizes to apply for the state opportunity for more CARES dollars or more support there. So we've done a lot of things because we are in a fortunate revenue position, and continue to try and focus on the COVID protection for our residents. I would say that although our cases are going up dramatically, much like the rest of the county, it's moving on a curve that way, that our community members have been super sensitive to it, have been very responsive, as the mayor indicated, to keeping themselves and others safe, and have been very generous in their donations of face coverings, which then we have taken and gotten out to our small businesses who are not able to necessarily afford a bunch of PPE as they're trying to put up plexiglass, as they are trying to move from outdoor dining, no outdoor dining. We're pretty sensitive about all of that. And I actually really appreciate all of the support from this community on the call in terms of support for the city, because we've had to do a number of things together. And I just really appreciate the partnership there, along with a lot of nonprofits and entities that are not on this call. So I don't know if that's the summary you're looking for, Mr. Mayor, but that's the summary I've provided thus far.
No, that was excellent. That was excellent.
Hopefully that answers your question, John. Good to see you, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I would only add to that. I mean, in terms of fiscal health and responsibility, it was interesting to see that online sales are robust. It is not unexpected. One of the questions that was brought up at the VTA board meeting, and that was my first board meeting yesterday for that organization, was that Measure B dollars driven by sales tax. It's not completely transparent as to where we're going with online dollars. You can't make just blanket assumptions, but those revenues are certainly increasing. And then from Cupertino's perspective, one thing I think not everyone just kind of looked in the crystal ball and saw happening was that once we had sheltering in place, a lot of people were buying more laptops and tablets. And so, from the business to business, sales taxes, we were deriving a reasonably healthy amount of revenue from that. So one thing that I did notice as well from the VTA perspective, when you talk about Measure B, people are also looking at the lessons of Measure A, and they did debt finance some of those items under Measure A with Measure A's own future dollars. I mean, I think that's a tool that Cupertino could potentially be doing. Of course, we don't have measures out there, and our debt financing is pretty much limited to the old library. So we tend to be really fiscally responsible. And so I don't think it's going too far afield to say that from a financial perspective, we're quite healthy as a city government.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In deference to what I learned from Deb, human factor limitations and our time, are there any last questions? We have a couple of other items on our agenda, and I wanted to make sure we take advantage of those discussions, but also make sure that everyone gets a chance to ask the question that they want of our mayor. Any last questions for the mayor? Please just unmute yourself.
This is Rajiv Mathur from Friends of Stevens Creek Trail.
Okay, go ahead, Rajiv.
Yeah, so we are very grateful to the city and the council, for having enabled, progress on the a third of a mile, on the tract of land, which was donated to the city for the extension of the trail. And we see that the work has already commenced, so a lot of credit, to the council and the city, for having gone ahead, in spite of objections, not so much, as in the case of some other projects that the city also considered. We are grateful that you have gone ahead, and we are now looking forward to similar support, to other development projects, like a uniform identity for the trade, where we are talking to multiple organizations and cities, like Mountain View, Cupertino, Sunnyvale, Los Altos, Mid-Penn, so that we can have, a common identity for the entire trail. So it's more by way of a comment, rather than a question. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Rajiv. I really appreciate that. And I think that, to be really open and fair about it, I mean, that was, for us, that was a very easy decision. I mean, when you go along the Stevens Creek corridor in Cupertino, within the borders of our jurisdiction, you have a lot going for you if you're trying to work on it. Political support is there. And we had a really good stakeholder there that, was willing to not only contribute the land, but did a lot of the groundwork in terms of interfacing with the neighbors former council member, former mayor, and and this is precisely what I mean when I say that there is opportunity in every component, and I just want to be able to try to glean that from the various aspects of our community. In terms of cohesion in signage and in place, I know that we have an operative document in Cupertino. I was involved with the Parks and Recreation Commission before coming onto council, and I know that we did come up with a master plan document that does have some of the signage, and I'll work to pull that and send it over, and maybe that could be a good baseline for considering what makes sense going forward.
Yeah, we already had some discussions, with the officials, from the city, and I think we have received. It's a tremendous document. So
Oh, good.
yeah. What we intend to do is not to. Our proposition is not to change any of the existing signage, that each city has. This is something which will go on top of so each city basically has its own signage, and it is not our endeavor to change any of those. We want a common sign which can cut across different jurisdictions, different cities. So that is the idea here, and we'll keep you posted as we make further progress. We are planning to have an interagency meeting with the various jurisdictions and stakeholders sometime hopefully in January, or if not in early February. And depending on how that goes, we'll keep you informed. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. We had two questions that I know of. Sean, are you still, do you still have your question?
Yeah. First off, welcome back, Mayor Paul. It's great to have you back.
Hi, Sean.
And Deb, thanks for that great, all the hard work you guys have done. Truly appreciate that. Mayor Paul, my question is, what are some of the critical items for Cupertino to address for this year? What are some of the big ticket items that we need to start to think about for 2021?
Yeah. Well, let me try to pick on a couple of items that one's obvious. The other one, I think is permeates, our political discussions. The obvious one is COVID. One thing that we've done a really good job of, I would say, in the last 3 years, essentially starting with when Tim Borden was the interim city manager a couple of years ago, was trying to define out what we are working on as a community via the council. And so that was the first time at that point in the then 4 years that I had been on council where we were really writing that down at the beginning of the calendar term. Right now, under Deb, who has done seemingly inexhaustible work, we do have a very cohesive document that states what the work plan is for council. And we've interconnected that. Vice Mayor Chow and I were in a subcommittee last year when I was vice mayor, and we really sat down and tried to figure out, okay, how do we make our commissions more cohesive with the activities of council, because the commissions are by and large advisory, and they're not really going in a uniform manner of how they're selecting the items and interfacing with us. So there is a document that basically tells us what are our priorities, what are we working on from the perspective of the public and council and our commissions each year. When we look at the impact of COVID, right now what we're needing to do is essentially take off a lot of those items, because we've been able to quantify the amount of work that would require. And so I would say that it's very much been at the forefront of what we've been doing. It's not been the only thing, of course. Life has gone on. What we would do is basically take a look at some of these major items in terms of transitioning back, making sure that people are safe as we're all getting vaccinated. I think that, if you can recall early summer, maybe midsummer, when people were starting to come back a little bit, a lot of the larger social dynamic was perhaps even encouraging them to go out. You know, you would go to one of the more active places in town, like Main Street, and you might get a little bit, you know, reticent with regard to the interactivity, right? And so I think from the city perspective, we need to keep an eye on that and make sure that we're not regulating with a heavy hand, but at least we're trying to say, okay, let's be sensible about how we go about enforcing and making sure that people are going to a safe trajectory as we get to the point where we can all, you know, hopefully resume business as usual. Although I did hear a tidbit about how these vaccinations are only going to be effective for a couple of years. So I think that has to be first and foremost on our minds. In terms of the other one, you know, that I wanted to touch upon, I think when you look at the various development projects that have been approved throughout the community, there's a constant push and pull, okay? But we're at a time right now where, you know, there are definitive opportunities. It looks like there may be significant amounts of dollars, for instance, coming in for various projects. If you're looking at environmental, perhaps even transit, on the highest level of our country's government. I mean, it may be one of these things where you're looking at something, and I don't want to get too much in the substance, so I want to speak a little bit more hypothetically here. When you're looking at something like fees that might impact, okay, that might affect, you know, particular developments, I think one of the things that you can have in a conversational tone, you know, in a collaborative tone, is basically say, look, you know, these are valuable things. Obviously, we've considered, we've approved. Let's try to figure out what we can be doing in a unified voice to try to encourage support to come in, so that, you know, we can speak to the problems that we're very clearly and in good faith trying to resolve, while also speaking to the concerns. And, you know, I absolutely encourage the open route, as opposed to the one where, you know, we're all kind of sitting there at 3 a.m. in the morning trying to needle each other and then going back and finding ways to, you know, do that some more. I don't think that's particularly effective. And the experiences of our last several years have kind of borne that out, frankly. So, I mean, it's one of those things where if we take that mindset, I think a lot of good things can be happening in the upcoming months.
Great, thank you. And the very last short question with a short response goes to the person who's waited the longest, the Honorable John Willie.
Oh, great. Thank you, Rick. I just wanted to touch on, you know, it's hard not to touch on what we've seen in Washington in the last day. And I am so happy to be in a region and to be in this community where we respect everyone, that we have ideas, we share the ideas, we have discussions, and it's done in a very democratic way. And so I just, you know, need to say something along that line, and then to follow it up with, you know, we're here for the residents of this community. We're here to make sure that we do everything we can to work with the residents, engage with the residents, and ultimately use that to make this community what the residents want. So we're here for the residents that are listening, you know, come and engage with us. We have our office hours, our round tables. Come and talk with us and share your ideas. And Happy New Year once again.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. All right, well, thank you, Mayor Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. We're happy to continue this tradition of having the mayor lead off our legislative program for each year, and it's going to be a heck of a year. So thank you, Mayor Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Rick.
The next item on our agenda is, in fact, an ongoing, I don't know if you call it an ongoing ordinance discussion or set of ordinance discussions. And to speak to that, I don't know if it's going to be Pugh or Erick who will lead off the discussion on the dark sky bird safe or bird safe dark sky. I just have one complaint that I think it should always be hyphenated. the bird safe.
Okay.
It's just one of those things.
I
But
think you may.
who's gonna start?
I think Pew is. There she is. So I'm gonna control I'm gonna start with the presentation. I'm gonna kick it over to Pew and then come back to me. Rick, I'll share my screen. Right
Okay.
now. Oops, sorry, I did that too fast. Okay. All right, everyone see my screen okay? Listen, silence is a yes.
Yes, it looks good.
Perfect. So like Rick said, Bird Safe Dark Sky is what we'll be presenting today. Pew and myself. My name's Erick Serrano with the City of Cupertino, Senior Planner, and then Pew will be presenting in a little while. She's our planning manager. So a little bit of background. This is part of the 1920 work program. The city does not have a bird safe or dark sky standards. Projects not exempt from CEQA are required to address bird strikes as part of the environmental review. That's usually where we see the kind of the bird safe aspects. We do have several types of policies that support environmental resources and a higher quality of design. So why regulations? So for light pollution, it's kind of tied with the dark sky movement, and dark sky movement kind of arose in the 1970s when light pollution was getting more and more into the fringe. And so there's been several cities that have adopted different dark sky ordinances, essentially lighting ordinances. Cities like Portola Valley, Malibu, San Luis Obispo. Currently, we do have a lot of regulations actually that have been transferred from our existing code into the ordinance, and I'll get into more detail about that later. But things that are in our commercial, general commercial and parking zones, there's several lighting standards that limit the exterior lighting types, the color, the intensity, the glare, that kind of stuff on hillside. It's more focused on a particular need. And then any motion activated lights, are focused in a certain area and not to exceed 100 watts. The code is silent on a vast majority of different areas. So like residential, mixed use, non-residential areas are kind of exempted from these lighting standards. You kind of do what you please. So the dark sky ordinance will kind of work to help implement these policies. So we've done a bit of outreach and some meetings. So we began this process back in October 28th, 2019 with a study session to the Planning Commission. So here are some of the things that we discussed, using existing professional standards, educational materials, light impacts on environment and health, which is pretty critical, and the importance of adequate security lighting and preventing light trespass. Light trespass is essentially your light going off to maybe your neighbors or another property. In February, we did do 2 community-wide outreach meetings where we sent postcards citywide. We had about 32 attendees for both the meetings, and we included some of their comments and input into the proposed ordinance. So we've went to Planning Commission on August 11th, where they gave staff more direction. So there was some concern about the cost of applying these regulations, reducing the applicability of the bird safe treatments, concerns about enforcing indoor lighting on residential projects, and concerns about outdoor lighting for late night activities, which we'll get a little bit more. In October, so we reassessed, updated the ordinance, went back on October 27th, 2020, where Planning Commission recommended approval of 4.10. I'm going to kick it off to Pew now. If she's there.
Thank you, Erick.
Okay.
So just going over what bird safe regulations are, in general, birds perceive buildings in this fashion, which is where you see reflections and a lot of light. So the whole intent of these regulations is to reduce building design elements or lighting features that are hazardous to birds, and they would eventually protect our natural environment. The 3 main areas that guide development of standards are location and siting, glass features that are hazardous to birds, and lighting that is also hazardous to birds as well. The main hazards to birds is really exposed reflective glass. Eric, next slide, please. Which is things that, they don't perceive glass or buildings as barriers, and they tend to try to fly through them. And that's when you get bird strikes. So that's the first hazard to glass. Next slide, please, Eric. Again, large expanses of highly transparent glass, which makes it appear that you can simply just fly through this particular structure without really putting the brakes on flying. Next slide. Bright lighting also causes fatigue for migrating birds. They are an attractant to birds, and they do tend to congregate when they do see high bright lighting. They get attracted to it, and then they get confused with they've already been flying long distances, and that also is a problem for birds. Next slide. So upon a review of what the problems are, we also went out and looked at what other cities have done with regard to bird safe policies and regulations. We looked at San Francisco, Toronto, Portland, Alameda, Santa Cruz, Oakland, and Sunnyvale, and found that they do have adopted policies and guidelines and regulations to address bird strikes. Next slide. There are plenty of bird safe solutions that can be applied to glass and glazing that will make it safer for birds. They include etching, fritting, physical improvements that actually block birds or block the glass from appearing too transparent, or from glass to appear as a large expanse for birds to fly through them. And so these are just some examples of bird safe solutions. Next slide, Eric. So the bird safe regulations are proposed to be applied to new or remodel of primary or accessory buildings, when you replace glass windows or features, when you have full building permit or you have a development project, and for parking lot upgrades and overhauls, essentially. Next slide. There are exemptions of applicability of bird safe regulations, which are to historic structures and to first floor commercial storefronts up to a height of 15 feet. And as Eric mentioned before, there were two exemptions that council did do away with, which were exempting single family residential outside of what were defined as bird sensitive areas, and also 100% affordable projects. So those were struck. And so currently in the current draft or the current ordinance, the two exemptions shown here are the ones that exist. Next slide. So the way that bird safe treatment works is that the standards would apply to the facade, the entire facade of a building, and no more than 10% of that facade would go untreated between the ground and 60 feet above it. And then no more than 5% of the facade would be untreated glass 60 feet above the ground. Next slide. So what can people do? As I shared in the earlier slide, there are many things that people can do. You could just have windows that have muntins, which is the grids that normally you see. You could have fritting, you could have exterior insect screens could also function as bird safety devices. You could also have decals. There are a bunch of methods in which to obtain compliance. Additionally, there is a process by which you could obtain alternative compliance. It would have to be recommended by a qualified biologist, which would then be reviewed and approved by the city. Next slide, please. With regard to non-residential, with regard to lighting, there are certain non-residential indoor lighting requirements, which would require time switch control devices or automatic occupancy sensors to be timed to turn off by 11 p.m. or 2 hours after the close of business. But after that, they would be automatic occupancy sensors that would allow people to be there. Next slide. In addition, there are certain outdoor lighting requirements for bird safety as well, to make sure that outdoor lighting is shielded and directed appropriately. There's still night hours, so after 11 p.m., as long as you have security lighting, that would still continue to be allowed, so that there is no issues with safety and security. There are existing illumination standards, as Eric said, So instead of incorporating those here, there's just a reference to make sure that projects comply with existing illumination standards. And then there are certain requirements for service station canopies, which are extraordinarily bright. So those have been incorporated into the bird safety lighting regulations. And with that, oh, thank you. There's one more. There are certain site planning and building design requirements, which is to make sure that when a site is designed or when landscaping is being designed, that they're designed in a manner so you avoid funneling flight paths towards the building facade. And you also avoid the use of highly reflective glass or highly transparent glass in projects. And also do not include glass features, transparent building corners, freestanding glass walls, or anything that birds perceive as being something that they can fly through. So those are things that we are looking at right now to be incorporated into this ordinance. And with that, I'll hand it over to Erick.
All right. So dark sky regulations. So in terms of applicability, projects would be required to comply with the outdoor lighting requirements whenever you building permit, electrical permit, outdoor lighting or signage, new or replacement lighting or development permit. That would all trigger the updates. Essentially, if you're adding a fixture or replacing a fixture, not a bulb or fixture specifically, you would be required to meet these requirements. In terms of submission requirements, different things depending on the type of project and the complexity of the project, but a site plan with all the outdoor lighting fixtures, description of each lighting fixture, so like a spec sheet, photometric plans, which could be waived if it's deemed unnecessary. We're thinking more like single family homes, duplexes, and smaller developments where the compliance can be determined merely looking at the fixtures and the property. So the big thing to kind of look at is outdoor lighting is meant to be shielded and directed. So you fully shielded the light directed downward towards a median away from adjacent properties and right away. There is an exception for low voltage landscape lighting, special architectural features, and public art, historic lighting fixtures, that kind of thing. Illumination levels. So we pretty much took over our existing standards. So no light has exceed 1 foot candle on the adjacent property. So think one candle in the area of light that it provides. No direct outside glare from a light source shall be visible above 3 feet at their public right of way. Maximum light intensity shall not exceed a maintained 10-foot candle when measured at finished grade. The color is to be less than 2700 Kelvin, which is like a yellowish white, kind of right in between. Night hours. So we allowed for outdoor lighting to extend past 11 p.m. The way the ordinance is written, essentially at 11 p.m. lighting would go to different, motion sensors, or if needed by the building code, be on. But the idea is if you are, an outdoor bar or a restaurant or something that has outdoor seating, that lighting can stay on as long as people are there. It would be reviewed as part of that development permit or that use permit that comes with the project to allow for that those longer hours. Automated control systems, so used for all outdoor lighting when sufficient daylight is available. Those lightings would extinguish when there's sufficient daylight. And if for motion controlled sensors, they would extinguish within 10 minutes of activation. So if you're like 3 o'clock at night and you're walking, the light would turn on. Once you're away, not in that area, the light would turn off within 10 minutes. Lighting design standards, essentially the lighting should match the building, the architecture, the design of the structure. Security lighting allowed, controlled by programmable motion sensor devices, except for required by building code. So if that something needs to be there. No floodlights, motion activated lights, not to exceed 100 watts. Included standards for service station canopies. And then again, critical areas of illumination, it's very prescribed in the building code that certain areas need to be lit more than others. And so we just defer to the building code for certain things. Oops, sorry. Prohibited lighting, flashing, strobe lights, uplighting, HID lighting. that RHID lamps will be prohibited. We do have a good amount of exemptions, so lighting within the public right of way in public parks, permitted lighting for signs, so that's regulated by our sign ordinance already. Lighting to illuminate addresses, temporary construction, emergency lighting, short-term lighting authorized by special advance permits, holiday seasonal lighting, and lighting required by the building code or state law. And that's it. All right. Rick, back to you.
Yeah. Other questions? I was actually paying attention. Thank you, Eric. Questions? I'm looking to see. Raise your hand if you have any questions. And while people collect their thoughts, Eric, in the ordinance, there's a list, or there's a reference to a list that may be maintained by the planning division of acceptable bird safe treatments. Is there a draft, or is that something that's being currently compiled?
I can answer that. That is something that we're still working on. We don't have a draft of that available just yet. The ordinance is due to go into effect 30 days after the second reading, and we are getting mobilized to get everything ready and be available by then.
Great, yeah, because it's as I'm sure as the city's worked on this and as the chamber has been coming up to speed, we've, I think, all discovered the same thing. And I'll be calling on Tim. Everyone likes the idea, you know, we all love birds. It's the details where people are spending a lot of time. Tim, you had a question.
Oh, as a huge bird advocate, and I applaud you guys for doing this because it's outstanding. I'm the guy with the shoebox with the bird and rehabbing a bird. Are there funds, just out of curiosity, are there federal or state funds that go out to assist businesses with this program?
So in, again, I'd like to point to the exemption that there is in the ordinance written in for commercial businesses up to storefronts up to 15 feet tall. They do not have to implement any bird safe treatments. That is as an economic development, I guess, factor to make sure that you do have, as a business owner, you do have the ability to make sure your storefronts are visible and in a manner that you wish to display any items of goods. In terms of other funds for other projects, based on our research, we found that depending on the type of bird safe treatment that is used, the costs of that are not enormous. Based on our conversations with two companies, we found that the cost adds between 2.5% to 5% of the cost of the curtain wall. Again, entirely dependent on the kind of bird safe treatment that you decide upon using.
Okay.
So I don't, Mark, but to your question, Tim, and then to you, Mark, I don't know, and please, if people find out, we'd be very interested in identifying sources of financial support for making these sorts of changes. Mark Tersini.
Question for Pew. Pew, when this bird safe design conversation started, the biologists that you interface with, did they do an analysis, or is Cupertino in a particular flight zone for birds, like some of the other cities that you've identified that were used as exemplary cities for bird safe designs? My question is really, one, does Cupertino have more bird strikes than other communities within the Bay Area? And are these migratory birds that we're trying to address, ducks, geese? I happen to be in a location that's near a pond, so I hear them lift off the water and fly over the building on a regular basis, but we've never had one. And I love birds as well. So I'm just trying to ask the question of where's this drag coming from? And does Cupertino currently have a problem with bird safe?
So I'd like to address that in two ways. One is we are in the Pacific flyaway. I guess there are certain pathways that birds use, and I guess Cupertino is in one of those flight paths for migratory birds. In general, we didn't go out and actually conduct a survey of, how many bird strikes has Cupertino had. That was not our charge. Our charge from the council was to come up with regulations for bird safe treatment and for dark sky regulations. And so that was where we were coming from, and that's where we based our research. On a personal note, and I've mentioned this before, we live, I personally live by a creek. I only have a single story home, but we do have two picture glass windows. And in the 8 years that we've lived here, sadly, I have had a couple of bird strikes in those windows, and it's always in the back of my head. We got to do something about that. But that's not to say that there are throngs of birds that fly over my house, but that has happened on a personal note.
Other Michael Strauss, and then Mike Rohde.
Thank you so much, Rick. I'm not sure if this is a question about dark skies or bird strikes, but of the bird safe. But what about hanging lights and Tivoli lights that add so much, so much atmosphere to public places? I'm sure some of Sandhill's beautiful properties like Main Street probably use them. I know use them at Cupertino Village, and I wonder if it would be hard to shield those, and so I wasn't sure if those would specifically be outlawed or by either of the policies.
So I'll take a stab at that one, Michael. So we did include an update to allow for I don't know where our Tilio lights are. That's a new one for me, but hanging lights. The big thing we do ask for in the ordinance is for lights to be shielded and directed downward. We did hear there was a lot of concern because we see a lot of outdoor dining now and outdoor uses. So we did update the ordinance to allow for string lighting to extend beyond just seasonal lighting and to allow it for commercial areas subject to certain requirements that we've listed in the updated ordinance. I think if you go to the December 15th council meeting, it's indicated there, but we have updated to allow for those things.
Great. Mike Rohde.
Hi there. A couple observations and questions. Typically restaurants, theaters, and entertainment components, have hours of operations, well beyond 11 p.m. And those type of restrictions, with those type of restrictions, they would operate next to a shopping center that would be forced to turn their lights off or diminish them in a greater sense, creating a bit of an illusion that the shopping center has a closed position. And then really that kind of imposes an impracticality of the business being closed. So, I think a well-lit shopping center is key to being productive. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to figure out is how is this going to impact, the surrounding tenants from a restaurant or some other component, especially when a tenant's got a conditional use permit to go for a longer period of time. And then I would just add my second question is, maybe somebody can explain to me what security lighting is and the detail of that.
Sure. So I'll do that first question. So lighting like you're saying, later in the night, that kind of thing would be reviewed as part of the overall development plan or use permit. So if you come in, I need to be open until 1 p.m. or 1 a.m. Sorry, and you are going through that process, we can reevaluate your lighting standards, and you can propose different lighting requirements for those areas so that they're illuminated sufficiently for your use. In terms of what you're saying, like the adjacent property, like your lights are on, but the adjacent property are off. there is a part of the ordinance that allows for adjacent non-residential properties to coordinate lighting, so that they can have that coordination between the two uses, so it doesn't give that impression for that. In terms of security lighting, security critical lighting, so we're thinking areas kind of stairwells, near ATM machines, maybe entrances, that kind of stuff, where it needs to be lit more, to address any concerns that there may be from users. So we don't want to have a dark stairwell, or we don't want to have a dark ATM machine. And the ordinance, our existing ordinance already allows for those higher areas of those types of uses to have a higher illumination standard. That's already built in. We just kind of move that over into the ordinance as well.
So, okay, so how about parking structures? There's a lot of security issues in parking structures typically. I would be very, very concerned about reducing lighting levels in parking structures, especially in the later evening hours. So how do you anticipate handling that, especially for several developments here in Cupertino that already have parking structures?
So there's two different lighting standards that we're looking at. So parking structures, and try to think how that phrase is appropriate. So for a parking structure that's enclosed, it needs to be, just prevent glare and shielded and directed to its particular use. Essentially, don't spill it over. That's the big thing. A parking structure itself, is enclosed, so it'd be more indoor lighting. The lights on top would be a bit different. So think Main Street on top of your parking garage. Those lights would be could be on. They can be on a motion sensor. If they need to be on, then that can be dealt with as well. There's occupancy sensors that you can have to light that pathway to ensure that those areas are appropriately lit. And again, if they if you are having that use permit or that development permit that says you may need extended hours, extended lighting, that's something that can be proposed and evaluated with that project.
Reed Molds has had his virtual hand up. It's got to be tired. Reed Molds, you had a question.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you to city staff for bringing this. I think February 2020 feels like a lifetime ago to many of us, and I just say the retail and commercial community has had no bandwidth in the last year to really focus on this kind of issue. So really appreciate the context, bringing it back, giving us an opportunity to ask questions. And I would just say, I'm looking at this, and I think everyone looks at this as a business context. I don't think any of us should feel we need to qualify our love and appreciation for birds before we start asking questions here. But my point is, look, very simple question. It looks like Pew and Erick, your presentation was about the same one that we saw you give to council. And many of us already saw that. My expectation was that the city would be addressing how this ordinance affects local businesses today. And I didn't see anything different. I just have to ask, have you put any meaningful thought into how these ordinances affect Cupertino businesses? Have you done that analysis so that we feel like you are looking at it from businesses' point of view, as opposed to having to do the analysis ourselves and then ask you questions about it?
So if you're talking about small business, again, I will point to the fact that there's an exemption for most single-story storefronts, which most of the strip malls are, and they're exempt. Those are the kinds of businesses that that when we look at that need that particular kind of thought, that's the kind of thought that we put into this. Again, we also looked to see what the costs of adding bird safe treatment would be. We're not going retroactive. So if there's an existing building, we aren't asking you to replace those windows right away or apply bird safe treatments to those. This is moving forward for new buildings, new permits, new replacement windows, etc. Most people, when they replace windows, they're again, the cost of when we looked at the cost of what it takes to put in bird safe treatment decals, these cost $2 per window. The rules that we saw, the things that we saw, so these are not extraordinarily expensive things that we're asking people to put on. If you choose to go beyond what is what is reasonable or what is the lowest threshold, that is a cost of business that you would, certainly have to consider. Beyond that, at this point, we weren't told that the focus was on how this would impact businesses, but we have put thought into that through the entire process in coming up with these regulations. We've also looked to several, regulations that other cities have adopted since, early 2010s. So this is not a new thing that we're, these regulations are not out of the box new things that we're choosing to propose. We've gone all the way out to Arizona. In fact, I've looked at dark sky and bird safe ordinances out there as well. So I think as staff, we stand firmly behind the research that we've done. We've talked extensively with the Audubon Society on these issues as well. Again, and I will also point out that most of the dark sky stuff that we have are existing lighting standards that we have today on the books in our municipal code. So the illumination standards, the parking lot standards, all of that stuff already exists in our municipal code today. We're just taking it all and compiling it in one section with some additional tweaks. I will grant that.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, when in the analysis that you speak of, what went into that? For example, how did you come up with the 15-foot exemption? You call a single story. I mean, there are some storefronts in town. I know your own code talks about ground floor going to 20 feet. And how are those conditions going to be dealt with? What's the likelihood, based on your experience, of a property owner or a business looking to go beyond what you said, the $2 application, and doing something more based on the materials you reviewed? Do you have an opinion as to what the how companies and how businesses will deal with this? What is the likelihood for how these folks are going to comply? And just in terms of dark sky as well, have you considered the various retail conditions throughout Cupertino and how they would be impacted differently? Mike and Michael were talking about centers like Cupertino Village and Main Street, and how they may be different from standalone retail boxes and those environments. So I'm wondering, have you done case studies on how this might be applied to a retail center versus a traditional standalone retail box?
So with regard to the 15 feet, usually around 15 feet is where we see a break of some sort in storefronts, either some sort of a overhang or some sort of, a cantilevered something. And again, that is, that's where the first, the clear 15 feet is where, a roof line or something. And that's why that 15 feet was proposed and chosen to be that break point. And I mean, that's true even of, big box, I won't say big box, but stores and companies that have, buildings that they fit in all communities, for example, Rite Aid and Walgreens and things like that. So even they, we kind of considered those kinds of things in building design and kind of came up with that 15-foot. We didn't hear anything differently from the community, and that's been something that has been consistently proposed since our first meetings in August to Planning Commission. We then, as far as looking at the retail, plazas, for example, Main Street and Cupertino Village, yeah, we did consider what those lighting standards haven't changed since Main Street was developed or Cupertino Village was developed. In fact, the permanent string lighting that kind of came about as a result of the Planning Commission's discussion on it was what we were trying to develop certain standards to allow those Tivoli lights and those string lighting that has been put up. All of that would be reviewed by the city and would be considered by the city in your design. So it's not entirely up to the centers in terms of what gets put up, but it does. The ordinance would allow for applications where you could do that aesthetically, do that kind of lighting, and there's always options for the development community to come up with a super exciting plan and propose that as alternatives for council and planning commission's consideration if they so chose. So there's always that option. And but yeah, thought has been put into it, particularly because we went back and we figured not all the shopping centers are one parcel. And so we did put in, a condition where, not a condition, but a regulation where we would allow light spillage or you to coordinate between properties and parcels. So thought has been put into that, not just for standalone single, strip malls.
If I can follow up on some of Reed's questions, again, focusing on the details, we're going to be seeing a lot of changes in our economic environment. We expect at least a third of all businesses to be closed in our area. With tenant improvements, at what level does that activate the bird safe? If a store, if an office or a store is implementing tenant improvements, will that require then upgrade to the new standard?
As long as you're not touching the electrical or the windows, no. But if you do make electrical improvements, then certainly the occupancy sensors and such will go into effect and will probably be required by the building code as well. So those won't be totally out there.
Okay, and then for repaving a parking lot, does that mean the lighting needs to be retrofitted?
It depends on the extent to which that project covers. We've had projects, where certain big companies in our town have redone the entire parking lot. They've reorganized parking stalls. They've redone landscape, areas. And so that, yes, would probably trigger certain parking lot light retrofits. We're not asking for the parking lot standards to be replaced, but certainly retrofitting to make sure that the lighting is shielded and downward directed. But if it's a minor, you're not doing anything great, you're just restriping existing parking stalls, no, we're not.
Great, okay. And I don't see any couple more, but before we get to the question, I wanted to recognize Councilmember Moore. Kitty joined us a little bit later. Thank you for joining us, Councilmember. Mike Rohde, any virtual hands that have been waiting there? No? Back to Mike.
Hey, Rick.
Oh,
hey, Rick, Sean here. Yeah.
Sean, go ahead.
Yes. Hey, so, I definitely hear a lot of concern from the business community and for those who are, the economic vitality for Cupertino is definitely a big question here, especially considering that, these times are very radically uncertain. We don't know the impact of when this pandemic will come to a close. It could be another year, it could be another 2 years. And for economies to restore, that's going to be a much longer trajectory, right? We can't expect business to be able to pick themselves up right away in this year. It may take 2022, 2023. So I guess, I'm asking the question is, can there be some consideration of a phased in approach as well so that business can comply, but, given a little bit of time so that they can kind of get strong again over the next several years? Is that something to think about?
I'm sure the council members that are here are taking that feedback back. As far as staff's recommendations go, At this point, we're not considering a phased plan, but it's certainly something that Eric and I can consider when we get back from this meeting. Again, I just do want to point out once again, we're not asking for people to go back and put bird safe treatments or go out and just simply, replace all their outdoor lighting right now, this minute. It's only if you are going to be replacing that lighting or you have to replace your windows for some certain reason. We also have, existing non-conforming thresholds in our municipal code. So if, for example, one window cracks because of something that happens, you can always go out and replace it, exactly the same way as it stands today. So again, this is only if you do an addition, a new, like a new project to your property, that's only when this will kick in.
Great, thank you. That was one of the questions. Mark, we're back to any other new questions. Mike Rody, you had your hand up earlier. I don't know if we still want to talk.
I did.
And then to Mark.
Yeah, I did, and I'll try and make this quick. So, Rick, you talked about TIs, and in the shopping center business, obviously, we're constantly doing lots of improvements and changes, and tenants come and go. You mentioned electrical, Pew. I mean, essentially, anytime a new tenant comes into a space, they typically touch the electrical. So, so in my opinion, that's a pretty simple trigger point for the city. Maybe it needs to be a threshold of some point where, if you're just doing a pretty simple electrical change out, maybe it needs to be over a $50,000 mark or some higher amount that doesn't trigger this. And then I guess the next thing is, how's the city fiscally and staff-wise going to monitor this? And are you going to do this with your parks and your own lights and your city street lights and all of that?
So as far as for TIs, you don't have to do bird safe improvements, particularly at Main Street, and they're all single story. For interior occupancy, if your business is not open past 11, you're not going to have your lights on interior. So that's already a given. For outdoor lights is where it comes in. So I'm not expecting your tenants to replace your center outdoor lights. I mean, they're generally they come with the center. I mean, unless you're changing out the lights for the entire center, that's an ASA, that's a separate process that needs to occur, and you would then have to comply with the city's outdoor lighting regulations. So, and as far as, I'm sorry, Mike, would you repeat your second question? I kind of lost my train of thought there.
Well, I was just saying, so I would assume at some point the city's going to follow your own advice here. You're going to maintain your own parks and streets and street lights and buildings.
Thank you. So this particular ordinance update does not address public lighting. Our zoning code is specifically for private property at this point. But in general, all of the city street lights are generally downward directed. And I think Eric might have something to add to that.
Yeah, so we did talk to Public Works about the lighting requirements, and they are essentially working towards already shielding downward directed a lot of their lighting. So I'm sure you've noticed, Mike, when you're driving around town the last few years at night, the lights have been changing. That's part of that change where they were modifying and going towards that route. And even as they do capital improvement projects to like open areas or building areas, they are doing these changes already. It just takes a bit of time, but from my understanding in my conversations with Public Works, they are working towards doing this.
If I can piggyback on a point that Mike had just made, reading the ordinance is interesting because one of the great challenges of local government is enforcement. And reading about light trespass, I know what that is because my neighbor's light is glaring in my window. But that's one of those details is how does city staff imagine and expect to be enforcing light trespass, violations or complaints.
Rick, I'd suggest you go talk to your neighbor first thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm our block leader program. That was a metaphorical. That wasn't actually. Thank you.
In general, you know, our city's code enforcement is reactive. So we do not act upon code enforcement unless complaints come in. We do not actively go out and enforce the city's code. So it continues to remain a reactive process unless, of course, we have tons of funding from council to increase our code enforcement staff. But I don't see the you know, that happening in our town. That is not the in the interests of our community. And I think it is, you know, it would just continue to remain reactive. You know, so I guess that's what it will remain.
So my recollection is for code enforcement, that's historically, that's usually a letter that comes in.
Correct. It starts with two notices of violation. You get 2 notices of violation before you get a pre-citation notice, which is pretty please.
Yeah, but
the problem.
yeah, and it's always about trying to. Our compliance is more. Can you please just comply? Can you work with us? And we want to give you the easiest path towards that. So if you're shielding, you might not be aware of the ordinance. So we want to help with that. You know, it's not. You know, we try to be nice as best as we can.
Okay. Well, I happen to notice that we're right at the 2 o'clock witching hour. I know people have very tight schedules. This is coming back to council, I think, on the 19th. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. Angela, I don't know if you're still here, if you want to say a few comments about the business activity report, and then I know, of course, people have to go.
Sure, just to make it easy for everyone, I've just put in the chat the link that I will be posting the January report to. As the mayor and city manager indicated earlier, it's going to be a very busy year. And so, you know, some of the larger projects, I have statuses inputted in the development report. You know, feel free to reach out to me if you have specific questions. In addition to the item that Pew and Erick presented to us, we also have a mobile services vendors item that will be presented to council on January 19th. And as it stands now, it is primarily concentrating on conforming to SB 946, which is allowing vendors at parks and public spaces. Other than that, again, feel free to reach out to me. Just a reminder about the state's grant program. That application period has been extended to January 13th. So please look into that. And if you have received other financial funding prior to this point, you are still eligible to apply for this grant program. Thank you.
Yes, and keep reapplying. We've heard from multiple people that it's their servers are slammed. Keep trying. Definitely keep trying. With that, I think we're all done. Councilmember Moore, did you have a comment or anything? I wasn't sure. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Happy 2021. Be safe. Wash your hands. Take care.